How's it going? I wanted to talk today about market tensions, and this is tensions about specific segments within the collectible community, and specifically the collectible card community. So we have players, we have collectors, we have investors, we have store owners, resellers, basically anyone who turns their hobby into a business but isn't a distributor, which is another market segment, and then, of course, the manufacturer. There's probably transportation and logistics in there too, but I don't think that they have that much of a influence on this specific kind of market tension. So, if we start with players. They want cheap game pieces, or some of them do. So, because the three types of people that are non-business people, players, collectors, and investors. Some of them could have their own businesses, but in a different industry or whatever. But the point is that they kind of overlap sometimes. Sometimes there's people that's purely players. Sometimes there's people that's purely collectors. Sometimes there's people that are purely investors. But often, most of the people in the collectible card hobby are one of these types or a combination thereof. Sometimes they lean stronger towards one than the other, and they could just be a perfect mix. The point is that if we're talking about the players, they want their cheap game pieces, but if they also happen to be collectors, they want the difficulty of finding things because they like the hunt, right? So if they're a player collector, then they're okay with more expensive game pieces. If they're an investor, they want value to be retained and also to increase over time. So that's where that group of people or an individual who has those types of things, that's where they stand in this market, basically. And then you have a store owner who could be collector, investor, and a player, but specifically, to be able to continue running the store needs to make money off of the hobby. And then obviously a reseller, same thing. So they want value first. There's got to be value in these things because they need to be able to convince people to buy them for more than they purchased from distributors. Distribution, how much they need value in there is not certain, but probably what concerns them most is the image of the thing. Is it something that people desire? And often the desire is there value? Is it a fun game? Is it, basically a bunch of things that go into the calculation of how much do we want to bring in and move out, and how much are we, how much are we willing to risk getting stuck with, that kind of thing. So that's distribution wants something similar to what the stores want, but not quite the exact same. They have a different perspective, and I don't pretend to know their whole perspective, but just enough that they know that they can move these things quickly enough and not get stuck with a lot of product, because the whole purpose of their business is to bring in product and move it out. Now, that's not to say that these distributors don't hold on to some of it because they know it goes up in value over time. That just makes them shrewd business people, right? Then you have the manufacturer, whether it's Pokemon or whether it's Wizards of the Coast or Legend Story Studios or Eric's Curiosa or Ravensburger. Their purpose is generally to continue to improve the perception of the game and to grow the game and to bring in more people to increase sales. And they are the ones that can put value in, and they're the ones that can put in the perception of the product and branding and all that kind of stuff. And they're, most importantly, the ones with their hands on the dial on how much of it to make, because you make too much and people don't want it because it's seen as a bad investment. It's seen as a too easy to collect. It's seen as too low value, and then the players themselves see it as a bad set, right? Often the difference between an actual bad set and a bad set because it's selling for less than MSRP or even less than wholesale price, that can drive players away. And I think that there were a lot of sets in 2022, 2023 that people avoided just because it wasn't selling well, but they actually were quite good sets. And now they may regret avoiding that. Anyway, the point is that the manufacturer has their hand on the dial, and can, ramp it up, turn it down, and put out however much product they think the market can handle. Now, sometimes they overestimate how much the market can handle because they want to make a lot more money, and that leads to overprinting, and then that leads to, if it's done enough times, a market crash. And this is what happened moving from the pandemic into 2022, is that a lot of these companies kept the same print runs they had moved up to in the pandemic, and the market wasn't sustaining that. So then they had to dial back the print runs, and now we're at this point with Prismatic Evolutions and some Magic sets that they are selling quite well, and the collector boxes for Magic the Gathering are moving up in value, and therefore people are desiring them more than they used to. If you just compare Crimson Vow collector boosters to Foundation's collector boosters, you'll see that now people are back on wanting to get collector boosters. So this dial moves back and forth based on the manufacturer calculating where to, turn the dial. And it's very complicated, and they get it wrong. And then these cycles of interest move in and out of this, and they can't necessarily predict them. And also, their decision making is often years in advance, right? So, like, if something is happening now, they can't just turn the boat to avoid an iceberg. They kind of have to have known about it prior to that to start the drift of the boat around the iceberg. So often they're making decisions about what's happening now, but those decisions aren't coming to fruition for a year or two. So that's one of the reasons why print runs are so low right now for both games, is because these are decisions that were made back when the market was really, really bad. So over time, we'll probably see a lessening of the dial, like the dial having gone down, and lower the print runs, and we'll start to see it tick up a little bit, right? And then we'll have moved into another cycle of perception, and things will go back to maybe not 2022 levels, but maybe 2023-ish levels, or maybe 2019 levels, or 2017 levels. But the whole point of this video is that this is a bunch of market tensions, in that there's so many different groups that each have different goals and different needs, different wants, and then also they have a different level of input to what's going on. So the players and the collectors and the investors, they, by buying product, are telling the manufacturer where to put the dial, right? And as I've said, the manufacturer's ability to change the direction is out of sync with what is currently happening. And the distributor provides a lot of data, as does the store, to what the market sentiment is, but they are also a little out of sync. The further you move from the person who's playing the game, the more out of sync they are. And also, the people that are playing the game, that are collecting, often aren't thinking about what they want, and therefore they aren't telling anybody what they want. They just suddenly one day decide to do something else, right? Like, you'll see this at the end of the 90s, when all the other card games collapsed, or some of them managed to eke out an existence into the early 2000s, but really only Pokemon, Yu-Gi-Oh!, and Magic the Gathering survived the 90s. But they, I think, barely survived the 90s because they were the top and they managed to squirrel away some cash, I guess, or at least they were seen as the ones that people still played. A bunch of people just stopped playing games in the early 2000s, and they stopped playing collectible card games in the early 2000s to about 2007, 2008 are basically almost a dead time for collectible card games. Not for the people that were collecting and investing back then. That was probably one of the best periods to buy stuff, and you'll see some people that are online that talk about buying stuff in that era. And yeah, and then sometime around 2006ish and into the 2010s, gaming became mainstream suddenly because a bunch of different things in media were happening. And then, whether it was video games or movies or TV referencing these things, and then people had grown up and they weren't going to college and going out partying or whatever it was that took them away from gaming. They got back into it. And then people who weren't even that into it in the 90s got into it, and it became this big old snowball, and that's how we got there now. But the point is that the tension between each of these not individuals but entities within the market is what creates the market prices, right? So when players, collectors, investors really, really want something, it goes up in price, obviously. But it also goes up in price when the manufacturer thinks that they don't want it and dials down the money machine go burr thing. Basically they print less product, so they reduce supply, and then demand goes up, and then you end up in a perfect storm that we're at now. It's supply and demand, yes, but also that I'm trying to point out the tension in between these things. They have desires and they want a certain thing. Like the players get upset when the game pieces become too expensive, and then the manufacturer, thinking that they can get more sales out of the players if they make the play pieces cheaper or affordable or something, but that might be a short-term thing, and then they realize that they also have the collectors, investors to think about, and their wants and needs, and that not everybody is one of those things. And we're in a period right now where supply is low, demand is high, and the tension is towards low print runs for now and high demand, because it's exciting to chase things that are hard to get, and also the things are good. That's one of the reasons people want it as well, is because the things are good. So that's another thing that the manufacturer can do, is improve quality or improve the product to make it shinier, flashier, newer, more exciting, or in the case of collectible card games, more powerful, right? So they don't just have that one dial to deal with how much they print or don't print. It's also what it is that they're making. And I think that they've hit a little bit of a sweet spot now, and that's where we're at. So let me know what you think, and put comments in below, and we'll see you next time.